Bang, bang. What's going on, guys? Hope you guys are really excited about this interview. I really enjoyed it. I think you will as well. But before we get into that, make sure that you like this video so that more people on YouTube can find it. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And don't forget that BlockFi is the sponsor today. They've got 3 products you can buy and sell crypto on their crypto exchange. You can deposit crypto and earn up to 8.6% APY in an interest-bearing account, or you can deposit crypto and take out a US dollar loan against your crypto collateral. You can use the description right here, or you can go to blockfi.com/pomp to learn more. All right, let's get into this episode. I hope you guys enjoy this one. All right, guys, bang, bang. I've got Sahil here. How are you doing, man?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, man. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for doing this. So you are the man with the finance education tweets and threads. I think everyone loves following you on Twitter, but who the hell are you? Let's start with your background. Where did you grow up, and how did you end up in the investing world?
Yeah, well, I ask myself that a lot too. So I'm happy to go into it of who I am. I grew up on the East Coast, Boston area. Pops is a professor at Harvard. My mom's from India, and she's a first generation immigrant. So I grew up in a kind of mixed race, multicultural household. Never really knew, who I was. Never felt like I kind of fully fit into one bucket or another. And the same was true for my kind of definition of myself growing up. I played baseball, but I was also pretty good in school. So I didn't really feel like I fit into the whole jock thing or the nerd thing, and kind of always tried to strafe and be in the middle of everything. Ended up being fortunate enough to get a baseball scholarship. Came out to California back in 2009, played baseball at Stanford. Was out here for 4 years, way over my skis for a number of them in that regard. And a lot of people have mentioned it. I've seen on Twitter a bunch of people calling it out when you tweeted out that we were doing this, asking about the home run I gave up. It's in my Twitter bio. So I'll have to get into that story at some point on how far that ball went. But that's kind of the background on my pre-real world experience. Back in 2014, I was fortunate enough to get a job in the investing world at an investment fund right out here in the Bay Area. Generalist firm. We kind of invest all across the GDP, everything from financial services, consumer, healthcare, industrials, etc. So I got a really broad-based experience from a young age. Got to invest in a ton of different kinds of businesses. And really operationally focused. Got to get my hands dirty and work with the businesses, with management teams. And today sit on the board of a number of companies in the portfolio and get to help these management teams go out and execute against the growth thesis. So it's been a pretty incredible ride so far.
That's awesome. Tell us the home run story. I mean, that's got to be an incredible story if it makes it all the way to your Twitter bio. What exactly happened?
Yeah, well, it's kind of one of those stories. It's like the reason sports are a metaphor for life. It was like a story of the highest high to the lowest low. So this is back in 2012. We were in the playoffs, college baseball playoffs. And so we hosted the regionals, which is like the small intro round to the playoffs in college baseball. I closed the regional championship game. It was like 10,000 fans, highlight of my baseball life to date, just an incredible experience. A week later, we are at Florida State in Tallahassee, playing them in super regionals with a trip to the College World Series on the line. I came in to pitch in a close game, bases loaded, and served up a little bit of a meatball and gave up a game-losing grand slam on national television, ESPN, the whole shebang. Tons of friends and family watching around the country, etc. Tons of screaming fans. So it was like a real lesson in life of going from that highest high to the lowest low and figuring out how are you going to pick yourself back up from this, this dark moment.
And so when you think about that, why did you put it in your Twitter bio? Is it just something that you feel like is a defining moment, or kind of what's the logic there?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit self-deprecating, obviously. It's also, and as people have called me out on, there's a little bit of a flex there of I was getting to play in a big game and on TV. And so it's kind of a joke I've always had with my friends, with my teammates. It was an absolute bomb. And I wish that it was a story around it was a nasty pitch and the guy happened to get it, but it was a fastball middle in, probably not as fast as I would have liked it to be. And the guy just turned on it and hit it a mile. So, for me, it's it's a moment of a humbling experience. And it's a common thread throughout my life that I tried to put myself in situations where I was a little bit uncomfortable and, could have those type of humbling experiences that I think are important to your development and who you become and how you grow. Like for me, going to Stanford in the first place was a humbling experience. I realized day one, I wasn't that good at baseball and I wasn't that smart. And like, I came from a small high school. I thought I was sick at baseball. I thought I was the coolest guy in the world. I thought I was brilliant. And you get there and everyone's way smarter than you and everyone's way more athletic than you. And that moment, those type of things, that's when you really force yourself to grow, because you realize like, I'm going to have to put in work if I want to achieve what I came here for. And so that's just been a common thread for me, and something that I try to live by is just go out and seek out those failures, go embrace those failures. And that's how you're going to end up growing.
Absolutely. Makes complete sense. You became very well known on Twitter for financial education, everything from the one-off tweets to these long threads explaining kind of complex concepts in very simple terms. What is the fascination with financial education? Why do you think that's so important?
Yeah, it goes back to my upbringing. Education was always important to my family. I mentioned my father was a professor. My grandfather in India was a chemist, was a professor. And it always struck me, this idea that talent is evenly distributed, opportunity is not. We talk about that a lot. I've seen it all over Twitter. People talk about it. And to me, education is the pathway to fixing that. Education is the path to evenly distributing opportunity across the world, in the US, but also globally. And it struck me back in this is March, April, May of last year, 2020. COVID hits. The economy is an absolute disaster. People are losing their jobs left and right. But all of a sudden, the market comes roaring back. And there were all these people out there, all my friends, family, teammates. I was kind of their resident finance guy. And so I was getting texts saying what's going on? How the hell is this happening? Why is the market roaring while the economy is in the tank? And it just struck me that all of these concepts around finance, investing, et cetera, have been overcomplicated by the kind of incumbents, the insiders, quote unquote, for way too long. To me, it's not that complicated for the most part. And the insiders have intentionally overcomplicated things in order to keep the outsiders out. There's this whole environment around finance of, the insiders wanting to make it seem cloudy and complicated so that you don't feel like you can do it yourself. Like, oh, my parents feel like they need to go pay a wealth advisor some exorbitant fee because they're made to believe all of this stuff is too complicated for them to understand. My parents are super well educated. They're really smart, but they're made to believe that they can't figure these things out for themselves. And it just doesn't sit right with me. And so back in May, I started thinking, okay, what's some way that I can, in a small way, start to be a part of a solution around this and start to spread information and make people realize that they can do these things on their own, that they can figure these things out. And so I took to Twitter. I had 500 followers at the time when I wrote my first thread, which was this Mr. Federico thread that everyone still talks about, which I find hilarious. But basically, I was out on a walk and came back home, sat on the floor of my garage, and basically just had this idea of a story I could tell to explain how Fed intervention in the markets is driving up asset prices. And I did it with this fictional character, Mr. Federico, and it was very tongue in cheek. But it got picked up by a few big accounts. Chamath retweeted it. Scott Melker, my friend, retweeted it. And all of a sudden it kind of took off and it snowballed a bit from there. But the genesis of it was really, let me try to demystify these concepts, using simple language, no jargon, make it accessible, make it digestible, give people the Toyota, not the Ferrari, for lack of a better way to say it.
Yeah. And so when you think through, let's say that we could give financial education to everyone. It was free. It was accessible. They paid attention. They learned the lessons. What's the impact on the market and maybe on their personal wealth once we actually get people educated? Because I think a lot of folks hear, financial education, they generally think that would be cool if we could do that, but they don't understand how impactful it could be.
Yeah. Well, when I think about my own life, or anyone's life for that matter, what is the fundamental goal that most people have in life? It's to take care of their family and their friends, to live a happy life and to be able to support those that they love. And wealth creation, building wealth, generating income, knowing what to do with it, is foundational to that. I don't know how you can have that end without understanding, the pathway to it. And that's through financial education, financial literacy. I am baffled that in high school or middle school, I learned about mitochondria. I learned about the Ming Dynasty. I learned about isosceles triangles and the Pythagorean theorem, but I didn't learn about taxes. I didn't learn about investing. I didn't know what the S&P 500 was. I didn't learn about budgeting. I mean, it's just insane that we have this education system in the richest country in the world where we're not educating people on how to take care of themselves for the future, how to build wealth and achieve the goals that they have for themselves financially.
What do you think the best way is to teach people this? Is it sit them in a classroom and have them learn that way? Is it give everybody $100 and say, go YOLO long and GameStop options? Like, how do we just get across the information in a way that people actually internalize it and truly understand and learn the lessons?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think all of traditional education needs to change and adapt. We're in this tech-enabled world now. If COVID has had one positive impact, it's that technology has had a 10, 15, 20 year accelerating event. And so people are realizing that and realizing the power that technology can hold in improving education. But for me, I think the old, sit in a classroom for 8 hours a day as a kid, be forced to wake up super early so you're not sleeping enough, go read a textbook and then come in and do a problem set. That model is dead. It's dying and it's going to be dead. And we need to figure out broadly, whether it's financial education or any subject, how we're going to educate kids so that the information sticks. Important information, and then make sure it sticks. And I think it's changing. I think gamifying information is a great way to do it. I mean, we joke about YOLO and GameStop options, but the idea of creating some form of game where people can learn about these topics in an engaging manner is very real. From your own personal experience, you can probably attest to it. I know I can. I've learned way more about all of these topics by actually going out and doing it and having to engage in it. And so when I think back on my own educational experience around these things from high school, I remember it being you have to fill out some work form around how your budget is. And I remember putting in what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said professional athlete. I played baseball at the time. And it told me my income was going to be $40,000 a year. And I realized I was going to have to eat ramen noodles every night for dinner. And it's just that's not realistic. It's not a good way to teach kids what they need to learn about these topics. And so to me, it comes down to delivering it in a more interesting way. I think I've gotten and kind of struck that chord a little bit with what I've been doing with the threads, but it's just scratching the surface on what some amazing companies are going to come out and do around these things in the future.
Yeah. And so do you think that the for-profit model is better because it aligns incentives and really kind of drives people to be successful and get the word out there? Is it a nonprofit? Do they coexist? How do you think about the kind of model that works best?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a small government guy for the most part, so my bias bleeds into this. I personally believe in capitalism. I believe that the private markets handle innovation much better than the public markets, and I think, frankly, that has been proven out throughout the history of our world and of our country. And so, for me, it comes down to the private markets. I think we need to allow innovation to happen. There are a lot of investment funds now that are investing heavily in ed tech. I think it's phenomenal. I think there are going to be some really differentiated, interesting models around education that are coming out. I mean, income sharing stuff, Lambda School, the cohort-based courses stuff that our friends Gagan and Wes are building. There's just some amazing stuff that's coming, but we need to make sure we're fostering it. We need to make sure that we're getting people to see it. There needs to be that access level so that we can start building, innovating, and iterating on it so that we can get better and better over time.
For sure. I'm actually an investor in a company that is not yet publicly announced themselves, I don't think. But basically what they've done is they've created a game and they're teaching young kids. It's not so much personal finance or the financial education, but it's more problem solving skills and teamwork and kind of things that are just life skills that will apply to every industry. And it's fascinating to watch how impactful it is when it's wrapped as a game versus when it is delivered in a classroom.
Totally. And I'm super bullish on, the idea of the metaverse and the future of all of these things and how education can be conducted in a totally virtual environment in the future, right? Ready Player One, people have seen the movie or read the book, but that future is not that far off. I mean, Fortnite is like starting to get at some of these things, but imagine a world where you can, in a virtual environment, learn new information, take classes, go anywhere in the world. You can study history by actually going to that place in a virtual world. Like, it's just incredible to think about the potential of these technologies if we continue to invest in them and support them, and if the government doesn't get in the way of allowing these innovations to happen.
Absolutely. I know you got a lot of thoughts about accreditation. So do I. Maybe talk through just like the accreditation laws, why maybe it actually makes sense to have some sort of barrier to investing, but also what some of the detrimental impacts of the specific laws that we have today are.
Yeah. You and I have interacted on this topic on Twitter a bit in the past. I mean, I think our accreditation laws are just archaic. I understand the genesis of them. In principle, the idea of requiring certain disclosures and understanding of what you're investing in prior to the investment makes sense. I get that. But the way it's applied is so absurd, almost asinine in America right now. I mean, the fact that I can I can't invest in my buddy's startup. He's starting some company, but I can invest in a XXX levered mortgage ETN on Robinhood, or I can go, like an 18-year-old can go lever up and buy a bunch of call options on Robinhood. And, just that does not make any sense, right? Like, it's hard to sit down and say that that's logical. And so that's what I really take issue with is like, if you have a system, I get it, but it needs to make sense broadly. It can't just, be focused in a certain area where you can't really figure out what the rhyme or reason is behind it. I don't. What do you think about it? I'm curious.
I just think it violates the American dream. Like, the whole promise of the American dream is that no matter where you come from, what language you speak, the color of your skin, your race, your religion, your wealth status, your education level, anything, you can come to this country and you can make a living for yourself, and you can pursue a life of, kind of happiness and economic prosperity.
Yeah,
we should probably do everything we possibly can to allow that to happen, and putting a kind of gate in front of some of the best investments. By saying, hey, if you're not wealthy, you're not smart enough to underwrite this, seems like, maybe there's a better way. Which, my question back to you is like, what is the better way? If you're given full carte blanche, powers, what do you do to fix it?
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. The whole idea of like using wealth as a proxy for intelligence is absurd. And we've seen over the last few months, right? Like the system has changed. And what wealth cannot be used as a proxy for intelligence, point blank, period. How do you fix it? I personally think you need to make the barriers to everything much lower. I'm personally just pro, allowing markets to work and the democratization of all of this stuff. I think like Matt Levine, who's one of my favorite writers on the internet, he writes money stuff for Bloomberg. It's an amazing newsletter if you're not subscribed. He talks about the I am stupid letter, which it's very tongue in cheek, but it's a funny idea where you basically have to click and check a box that says, I understand this is a risky investment and I am likely to lose all of my money on it. And you acknowledge it, you read it, you acknowledge it, and then you're able to make the investment. And I actually think, all jokes aside, it's an interesting way of getting at it, where you're forcing the person to acknowledge that it's a risky asset class. And that should apply to a XXX levered mortgage ETN or a GameStop call option the same way it should to my friend who's starting a restaurant startup or whatever it might be. But if you force people to have that moment of kind of recognition of the risky nature of the investment, you have to allow people to, take care of themselves, right? It's like survival of the fittest in some sense, where I don't think the government's role is to be out there trying to protect people in a weird, non-standardized way by placing accreditation in front of certain asset classes and not in front of others.
Yeah, I think Europe has something where it's basically you can say, hey, I'm educated and therefore I'm willing to take much more risk. And basically there's no protections, go wild, you're a cowboy, but you said that you were educated and so it's your fault, if you mess up. Or you could say, hey, I'm not educated, like basically put, it's like bowling, put up the bumpers so that I make sure I don't, throw the gutter ball. What I think is a fascinating conversation is if we accelerate this and we say, okay, the problem gets solved. Eventually now every market is democratized, right? Public markets are basically already democratized. If yes, you have to get an account. Yes, you have to kind of go through some hoops, but if you are able to do that, then yes, you can participate in the market regardless of status or wealth. But the private markets, it seems like those would be the ones that would be most kind of materially impacted. How would that change the private market? Would a bunch of dumb ideas go get funded? Would just the returns get more distributed across, kind of the investor base? Like, how do you think the private market changes with the democratization of that market?
I mean, personally, I think democratization leads to more efficient markets. You have everyone able to participate. And so like the supply and demand sides of these markets become more efficient broadly. Again, I'm a free market guy. Like this is what I believe in. But when you put up regulations in front of things, that creates issues in markets. We know this. This is like basic economics. And so if you create an environment where you allow people to invest, when they acknowledge they understand the risks of something, but you allow them to invest in it, I don't think anything changes for the worse. Maybe some people lose their money on speculative investments and then they don't do that investment the next time because they've learned from it or they have a risk tolerance around it. But it just doesn't make sense fundamentally that like we're not going to put that in front of a call option on GameStop, but we are going to put it in front of a investment in their friend's restaurant startup. It doesn't make sense. And there are platforms now that are, doing this already, right? Like Fundrise allows you to invest in real estate as an asset class, which was previously only for accredited investors. AngelList, I think, is making progress on this for non-accredited investors. There's real progress being made. But the basic thing is let's open up all of these asset classes to everyone. We shouldn't live in a world where the wealthy get to invest at higher returns, get lower cost of capital overall and just accrue their wealth in an incredible way as a result of these advantages that exist. I believe we should live in a world that has an even playing field, at least from an opportunity standpoint. And that doesn't mean that everyone is going to take advantage and work as hard as they need to and go after things the way they need to become, extraordinarily wealthy. But it does give everyone the opportunity to do that. And again, back to the point of opportunity being evenly distributed, that's what the end goal should be for society, in my view. And so this all gets to that.
Once people are educated, once the laws change, and there's kind of this democratized access, then we've got to do a good job educating people on how to be a good investor. And you've done a bunch around mental models for investors and threads on Twitter and elsewhere. Kind of talk through a little bit how you think about those mental models. Are there any favorites that you have? And kind of why are those so important to somebody who wants to be an investor?
Yeah. I mean, mental models are a fancy term that people like to use. And I've been someone that's propagated this as well, but basically it's just ways to think about the world, what ways to go think about different problems that you're encountering. And they don't need to be investing problems. You can use mental models for anything that's in your life, relationships, whatever it might be. But I think mental models are important because they allow you to simplify and solve complex problems that you're encountering. So first principles is one of my favorite mental models. You hear about it a lot, read about it a lot. No one really understands it from what I found. I wrote a thread on it that was really popular because I think a lot of people hear first principles, they say first principles, and they don't know what the hell it means. But basically, this is the idea that you need to ground things in foundational truths. So stop accepting that's just the way it's always been done, or just because. Like if you are answering a question for someone and you find yourself frustrated and you want to react by saying, because I said so, or because that's the way we do it, that's usually a sign that your foundational assumptions are not grounded in a real truth that you've proven. So like Elon Musk is the best example of this with SpaceX. And people have talked about this in the past. It was written about in his book. Rockets were really expensive. And that was a huge issue for him creating this future where you could go to Mars and create a society on Mars. And so he grounded his solution to that problem in first principles. He went and looked at what were the material costs of making a rocket, and found out that actually the individual materials to construct a rocket collectively were way less expensive than the cost of a rocket on the open market. And so he built one himself. And, fast forward 10 plus years and you have this incredible progress being made at SpaceX. What they're doing with Starlink, by the way, is otherworldly and is going to be incredible in terms of bringing access to the internet, Wi-Fi technology to people around the world that are in city areas that have coverage. But just an amazing amount of progress that was all based in this idea of first principles thinking. Second order thinking is the other big one for me that I think about a lot. It's just this idea of thinking deeper, going beyond the first order effects of something. It's very easy to see the rock hit the pond and the first little ripple or splash that comes from it. It's much more difficult to think through, okay, what happens after that? And then what? And then what? And how does that all play out? COVID was a great example of that and how that played into our world. The first order thinker would have seen COVID hitting and said, oh man, the country is going to shut down. I'm going to sell all of my money out of the markets. I'm going to, buy put options on the market because the markets are going to crash. The second order thinker might have thought, wow, the markets are going to crash because the economy is going to shut down. People are going to be stuck at home and have to work from home. So maybe Zoom's a good buy because people are going to be sitting on video chats all day. And here we are. But that's kind of this idea of like, think deeper, go beyond just the surface level discussion and the surface level thinking that exists and think a bit deeper. So, there's hundreds of mental models. Farnham Street does a great job. Shane Parrish over there does an incredible job laying a lot of this out. I've seen James Clear talking about these things online. There's a bunch of resources. I write threads on some of this stuff. But it's really important. And you'll start seeing the world differently. And you'll start seeing these things everywhere. And it will help you, I can guarantee it, make decisions in real time about the world around you, about investments, about business decisions, your own writing, whatever it might be. And so it's worth digging into.
How do you think people can get better at implementing mental models in their daily life, right? They can read about it. Is that the best way, just to be aware of them and therefore start to apply them? Or are there other things that you found to be valuable in terms of the implementation or the usage of mental models?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. And one thing I try to do with all of my writing is at the end of it, talk about how you can actually implement it into your kind of daily life, whether it's investing or your business, whatever it might be. The first step is definitely understanding what it is. I find personally, and you should tell me if you don't, I personally find that when I've learned something new, I am prone to see it in action in the real world, whatever it might be. And so for me, when I first read about first principles, I found myself taking forever to answer every question because I was trying to ground everything in first principles. And that's not replicable. And you can't go do that the rest of your life. You'll drive yourself nuts. But it's an interesting case study of when you've learned something new, you try to go apply it. Now you've applied it a couple times and now you know when to use it and when not to. You're starting to build this repetition around it so that you've kind of greased the wheels. And I think that that's the most powerful thing is you learn it and then try to see it, in your daily life around you a little bit. It's basically, it's no different than learning a new skill. You learn how to swing a golf club and then you want to go practice it a couple times and now you're better at swinging it, or baseball or sports, whatever it might be. It's the same way with anything mental, any decision-making frameworks. You need to put them into action in order to realize the benefits.
For sure. What lessons from sports did you learn to kind of implement as an investor? Are there specific things you took from the sports career?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, embracing failure is the number one, right? Sports by nature, baseball in particular, is a failure-driven sport. They always say as a hitter, you're great if you fail 7 out of 10 times. I was a pitcher, so it wasn't quite that bad, luckily. But you need to learn how to get up from those bad moments. And it's the most important thing. You can't just stay down. When you get knocked down in a sport, you need to, your teammates and you need to be able to pick yourself up and go after the next hitter or go after the next rep, whatever it might be. So that's number one for me is like those failures you need to learn to embrace and even seek out. I think if you do this for a living with the podcast, but you interview 100 incredible people who have achieved amazing successes in their life, they will all, when you ask them to point to transformative moments in their life, point to failures. No one points to, oh, I won this great award, and then that, was such a great moment in my life, and now look where I am. I've made it. They all point to some point of disappointment. They point to some failure they had, a test they failed, a rejection they had, whatever it might be. Those moments of failure actually end up being the kind of spark behind growth. And so when you think about that, that means you really need to embrace those moments. You can't hide from failure. You can't shelter yourself from failure. And it applies to being a parent as well. I mean, you can't hide your kids and insulate them from those moments of pain, those moments of failure, because they are so transformative when you're growing up to just experience that, feel that disappointment, and let it kind of charge you for that next round of growth.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Before we go into the rapid fire questions to wrap up, I want to talk about one very, very big topic that's going to take us a few minutes. Audience building, community building. You've done a fantastic job, probably one of the best people on Twitter recently. What are the lessons you've learned there? And what are the tips that you have for other people in terms of how they can maybe not replicate your exact success, but take some of the ingredients and kind of implement it for themselves on a daily basis?
Yeah. Well, me and your brother, Joe, have really come up together in the Twitter world. I feel like we started right around the same time, and I personally have fed off of the energy that's come off of his growth as well, and seeing some of the things he was doing well. But, for me, there's a couple principles that I think broadly apply to anyone. Number one, my core principle to all of this is create great product and then hustle for distribution, especially when you're starting out. And so you cannot forget that first piece. I think there are a ton of people that are churning out content and just, you see them posting it everywhere and they're posting every day. And they'd be much better off focusing on making sure the product is truly valuable and great. And the product, in the case of content, is, what are you writing? Like on Twitter, what are the threads? What are the tweets? How are they creating value for the people that you're putting them out to? Because at the end of the day, audience growth comes from people wanting to share your content. And people share your content because they got value out of it and want to share that value with others. And so that was always the founding principle for me, was I was going to really put a ton of time into creating great content and creating value for people. And then I was willing to go out and hustle for distribution. I mean, I remember posting my threads underneath people's, with high traffic accounts so that they would see it. Chamath retweeted my first thread because I posted it underneath one of his tweets. And is it a little bit shameless? Sure. But I had 500 followers at the time, and my thread, which I knew was very good, would have gotten 1,000 impressions had I not done that. And as a result, it got shared much more widely and people were able to see what I was creating. So that's number one. Number two, I think there are a few kind of hacks, quote unquote, to it, beyond spending a lot of time and creating great content. Personally, I think content loops are one of the most incredible things you can do when you're building audience. I've done this. I learned it from Ben Thompson with Stratechery and what he does he's built up this unbelievable base of content that he can be linking back to and keeping you in his content ecosystem. I do it with my threads. I have, 90 or so threads now that I've written, and a lot of them are on foundational concepts. And so when I'm writing a thread on the GameStop saga and talking about gamma squeeze, which is this interesting concept, I'm able to link back to my thread that I did on call options or my thread that I did on short squeezes months ago and keep people within this content ecosystem of the Sahil Bloom educational world. That's really powerful. It builds affinity. It builds a base. It's a moat. When you just think about a business moat, because no one can just go overnight have that repository of 90 plus threads, all the 50,000 words, whatever it might be that I've created. No one can just do that overnight. It's been built up through sheer effort over the course of the last 9-10 months. And you can't just disrupt that out of the blue. And so as you're thinking about creating your own content and building your audience, think about ways that you can create that moat and build a moat around what you're doing. And then the third one for me is just engage with people. Community audience is great. Audience size is great, but community is much more powerful. I'd much rather have 10,000 raving fans than 100,000 people that don't really care about what I post. And so engage with people, respond to them when they, send you a DM or do your best to, respond to comments, reply to things thoughtfully. If you take the time to do that, people are much more, invested in what you're creating. And I think that's a powerful thing.
I know that this stuff takes a really long time. I see my brother do it, almost on a daily basis. Literally can take hours to put one of these threads together. What's your exact process in terms of how do you come up with the idea? Where do you go to research it? And then how do you actually write it? And does anybody edit it for you?
Yeah, so this is all on my own right now. I have there's no team, there's no Sahil Bloom enterprise in any way. My general process is when something piques my interest, a topic that personally I want to learn more about and feel like there's something interesting to talk about there. I generally spend, depending on the topic, an hour to 2 hours researching it, old books that I've read on it, websites, etc. Then I'll draft, lay out a thread that probably takes me another hour and a half, 2 hours. And then I edit down a lot. The whole point to these threads for me is like, make it look like it was effortless. But the reality is it was effortful. And you've seen this with your brother. I mean, it's hours and hours of work to write well and to write clearly. And for me, that's all about creating content that is like very well suited for Twitter in that it is punchy. It's really short and direct. It's simple. I'm not using long, complicated sentence structures. Like I literally am writing one punchy sentence at a time, and it makes it more digestible as you're reading through, and you're more likely to convert from one tweet to the next because it's that way. So that's generally my process. I mean, it probably takes me somewhere between 5 to 8 hours, depending on the topic, to get something completely done. Every now and then there's something that I just know really deeply before having to research, and that shortens the time. But I really put a lot of effort into it. It's not like I, press play and there's all these threads that just spew out of my mouth onto the paper. It's a process that's intentionally, it's intended to look like it's effortless, but the reality is there's a ton of work that goes on behind the scenes. And yeah, like David Perel has been a big inspiration around that. He's written a lot about that content creation process, and I find his work fantastic.
Absolutely. How do you know when one's going viral? Everyone's got the thing of, is it a certain number of favorites in an hour? Is it in a minute? Like, what's the thing where you're like, yep, that one's going viral versus, oh, wow, that one didn't get as much engagement. It's not going to go as far as I thought it was.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's changed over time for me, like what I consider a good tweet, good thread, just as I've grown my following. For me, generally, like, getting to 200 retweets in the first hour is usually a pretty good indication. I normally post like early in the morning, like 6:30 Pacific time, 6:30 or 7 Pacific time. And I always find that there's this like late surge overnight Pacific time when I think it's like when my Indian followers wake up or something, or like are in the middle of their day and seeing it, because there's always this big surge overnight. But generally speaking, I find that like in the first hour, if it gets to 200 retweets, there's a lot of traction around it. Obviously, scale retweets from big accounts make a huge difference just in the impressions. But I've never had something go viral like the way your brother has, or some of these tweets that I've seen out there. I mean, a couple of my good friends like Julian Shapiro and Greg Eisenberg, some of these guys have had tweets go 40,000, 50,000 likes. I've never had that. I mean, I think my biggest tweet ever is like 14 or 15,000 maybe. So for me, it's been like, really just long-term compounding, plodding away, putting out what I think is high quality content on a, daily, weekly basis.
Yeah. Is there anything that you've learned from the process that has been most surprising to you? Whether it's, somebody you met, something about the actual process, just like what's been the most surprising thing?
I think the most surprising has been the incredible power of social media for access to amazing people. I never thought when I got into it that this would open up my entire world to all these amazing people. I mean, I haven't directly monetized anything I've done. I'm not selling anything. There's no direct monetization. But I can candidly say that the people that I've met and the friends I've made through it are worth millions and millions of dollars to me. I mean, it's just these incredible people that I have access to. I mean, like frankly, at the beginning of me posting in May on Twitter, like the idea of sitting here and having a conversation with you would have been absurd to me if you had told me that that was possible. Raoul Paul, the Real Vision, who's become a close friend of mine, I would have like died for him to just like one of my tweets in July or August, and now I get to work with the guy and he's a friend. And that's just amazing to me. Like this idea of what social media and these social networks can open up to you. From a network standpoint, from a people standpoint, it's really, someone described it as the ability to meet amazing people at scale. And that really is what I found most surprising about it. It's just these incredible people that you have access to, that you can learn from, people that are genuine, putting out content that is incredibly informational. The learning experience, the networks, all of that has just blown my mind.
Absolutely. Before I wrap up, I was asking everyone the same three questions. But before I do that, there's one question that's very important. If you're pitching and my brother Joe's hitting, are you striking him out, or is he hitting a grand slam?
I'm definitely striking him out. I don't know anything about his baseball. I could walk out there right now and strike him out. I'm sorry, Joe. My arm might fall off doing it, but I'm definitely striking you out.
Now, I asked him before this the exact same question, and you know what his response was?
I bet he said he was going to strike out.
No, he said, listen, I never hit the ball out of the stadium, but I definitely would hit the ball out of the stadium on Sahil.
We're going to have to talk about it later, man. I don't know. He looks athletic. My arm might fall off, but I think I'd rather die than give up another home run.
What's the most important book that you've ever read?
Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb, who I know, by the way, is like persona non grata within the Bitcoin community now for his recent comments. But man, that book is foundational.
Yeah, he wrote a great book about being anti-fragile. He somehow became fragile, though, I think, because he started blocking people. And,
there's an irony there.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on, but hey, to each their own. As long as he's happy, good for him. Second question is about sleep. Comes from our friends over at 8 Sleep. I sleep on their thermo-regulated bed and sleep like a baby now, but I used to be like a 6-hour sleeper. What is your sleep schedule, and do you use any products when you go to sleep, and how's that evolved over time?
Yeah, and I've actually been looking into getting an 8 Sleep bed as well. Big fan of what they're building over there, and think it's incredible, the power of the wearable side of it in the future. I don't sleep enough. I'm a morning person, so I'm up by 3:45 or 4 every single morning, regardless of what time I go to sleep. I probably get to sleep by like 9 p.m. on most nights. So I kind of have a like 80-year-old man schedule, for lack of a better way to put it. I don't really use any sleep products. When I'm training hard, I'll take like ZMA or some form of magnesium before bed. Just goes back to my baseball days from that. But no, I don't have a great sleep schedule, frankly. I need to get better about it.
What are you doing at 3:45, 4 o'clock in the morning?
It's quiet, man. That's when I get my work done. No, I normally read for an hour to start the day. So I'll read from 4 to 5, whatever I'm excited about. I try not to have, I kind of follow like the Naval rule around books. I try not to like just read something through to the finish, even if it's miserable. So I'm bouncing around different books, different articles, things I'm excited about, areas I want to learn more about. So I spend the first hour doing that. And then I normally reserve from about 5 to 7 a.m. for like, I call it deep work. Basically like whatever my big time intensive, really thought provoking task is for the day, I'll spend the first 2 hours in the morning working on that. And it's before any emails come in. It's before you have meetings. And so you're really able to focus and not have those distractions. I find it really, really helpful.
Got it. Last question is more fun. Aliens, are you a believer or non-believer?
Believer for sure, man. Come on.
Why?
I cannot believe that there is, an infinite universe out there and that other life does not exist. I'm like, again, I'm a math, I'm a probabilities guy. Like it's just unfathomable to me to believe that. And, I have a friend out there, close friend from my childhood, who he and I talk about this all the time and share all of the articles and everything that's been coming out over the last year or so. So definitely believer on aliens.
You could ask me one question to finish up. What do you got for me?
How do you do it, man? How do you manage all of the different things you've got going on in your life with Bitcoin ripping 52,000 plus, whatever it's at right now? How do you manage all the different work streams, different things in your life?
I just do the best I can. Frankly, I'm not good at it, right? That's like the short answer. I miss emails. I literally missed an email the other day for a company that is super hot now, and I was pissed at myself. But I've learned over time, like, just shit happens, right? Like you're going to miss some stuff. And so you can either optimize for, let's say from a communication standpoint, missing nothing, but then you're not as productive, right? And so you don't actually have as much output. And so if you kind of have to come up with that balance, it's just, look, be as output productive as possible and do the best you can with the inbound. And then when it comes from kind of like, how do you actually do the amount of work? It's just an efficiency thing. And I'm actually very inefficient with my time. Like, Polina's always giving me shit. She's like, dude, you're on Twitter all day long. And I'm like, yeah, but like, I'm staying in the flow of things. I'm reading things. I'm seeing what's happening. Like it all kind of feeds into the various activities that I do. But I probably spend too much time on Twitter. Like, I don't know what my time spent per day is, but like, it's probably pretty high, and it's probably too high. Right. And so even with somebody who's got a pretty rigid schedule, and I stay pretty efficient, I've got kind of blocks of time to do certain activities and kind of really make sure that I hit the output goals that I have. I still waste time. And so, I'm super envious of people who are able to basically just go through their day like a machine, waste zero time. But like, I always joke around, like, I just like to screw around on the internet. I find enjoyment in doing that. So let me do it. Right. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's a lot of interesting learnings in there for a lot of people.
Where can we send people to find you on the internet or anything that you're writing?
Yeah, well, follow me on Twitter at Sahil Bloom. Just my name there. You'll see the baseball Grand Slam thing in my bio, and then I also publish all of my content via a newsletter. That's sahilbloom.substack.com.
Awesome, man. Listen, thank you so much for doing this. You're doing a great job on Twitter. I think people are learning a ton for you. I completely agree on financial education, the lack of accreditation laws, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So we'll have to do this again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure.